How much wealth do you think exists in the world? Is it $1 trillion? How about $100 trillion? It's difficult to imagine, but the total amount of wealth has surpassed $464 trillion. Think about that number for a moment. $464 trillion. If we were to distribute that wealth equally among the 8 billion people that inhabit our planet, each person would have a net worth of $58,000. At first, it might not seem like a lot of money, but considering the fact that most Americans can't even come up with $1,000 emergency, it starts to appear like a reasonable amount of money. The United States is the wealthiest country in the world. In fact, it's the wealthiest country in human history. However, even in this prosperous nation, 60% of people live paycheck to paycheck. So it raises the question, where exactly is the $500 billion of wealth is hiding? The problem isn't that there isn't enough money in the world, but rather that most people simply don't understand how money works. I went from barely paying my bills to becoming financially independent. And as I climbed the economic ladder, I realized how my perspective of money has changed over time. When I say that I was barely paying my bills, I mean that I was renting a room and budgeted every penny because I would have been homeless or ended up starving. Even when I started earning over 100 times more money than I spent, I still found it difficult to overcome the psychological barrier to start spending money. But what I have realized over time is that how my perspective on money has evolved. I want to make it clear that I have never been lazy. I've always worked hard. When I went to college, I graduated at the top of my class while working at 2 jobs and was determined that when I graduate, I will find a great job at a great company. However, I discovered that's not how you get rich. So here are the 7 biggest money secrets that keep the rich people getting richer. If you're ready, give this video a thumbs up and let's start with the first one. Money is nothing but information. Most people have the wrong idea about what money is. They think that having a lot of money will make them rich. Well, that is true to a certain extent, but it is not entirely accurate. Money is just information through which we exchange resources. I like to bring up the example that Elon Musk once gave. Imagine you're trapped on a tropical island with trillions of dollars. You can't buy food with that money, and your $1 trillion won't protect you from the wild animals that are out there. So, are you really rich and powerful? The lion in the jungle doesn't care about your $1 trillion. It will just eat you alive. In reality, money is just a tool that measures your output and stores it in a database so that you can conveniently exchange goods and services without being engaged in barter. Let's say you make delicious cookies. If we want to avoid barter, we first need to measure how much your cookies are valued, or in other words, how much people value your output. When you start looking at money from that perspective, suddenly you realize that the more you produce, the more money you're going to make. This may sound logical and not like breaking news, but as they say, obvious things aren't always obvious. People are constantly looking for ways to make money. Just go on YouTube and search 10 ways to make money online, and you will find dozens of videos, maybe hundreds of videos with millions of views. Some of them have some solid advice, but essentially that is the wrong question to ask. The question that you should be asking is, how can I maximize my output? When you start looking at money from that perspective, you stop looking for easy ways to make money online and start thinking about, how do I manage my time and resources in such a way that I produce as much as possible, maximizing my output? And that takes us to the second idea, which is focus on increasing your output. The easiest way is, of course, to learn one specific skill, such as accounting or law or plumbing or making a coffee. Your output becomes the specific service or product that you provide. But the problem is that we are restricted by time. So the question that you should be asking yourself is, how do I manage my resources better so that I increase my output within the same time frame? Let's say that you have $1 billion. It's easy to increase your output. You can just buy a solid, reliable business and let it generate an X amount of money. Let's say it's a coffee shop and your output is a certain number of delicious coffees. But if that $1 billion is sitting somewhere doing nothing, then it's $1 billion of useless money. But let's say hypothetically that you don't have $1 billion. I know that it's difficult to imagine something like that, but let's just imagine for a moment that you live paycheck to paycheck and you don't have $1 billion. Can you still have a coffee shop? Of course you can, if you can allocate the resources you have effectively. So what do you need? A place to make a coffee, the equipment, a waiter, a barista, a good marketing strategy to attract clients, and an investor. Let's say that this place rents for $120,000 a year. Hiring 3 people will cost you something between $150,000 and the rest would cost you something around $100,000, which makes it a total amount of $370,000. And let's assume that your coffee shop will make $500,000 a year, which leaves you with $130,000 of profit. So what you're essentially doing is effectively allocating resources. You are deciding how to use and manage different things like time, money, materials, and people, and create a better outcome. Making more money is like playing a game where you have to figure out how to use your resources in the most efficient way possible. When you're good at resource allocation, you can accomplish more with what you have. So instead of focusing on how to make more money, focus on increasing your output with the resources you have. And that takes us to the next point of this video. How do you raise your output? Focus on building skills. The easiest way to increase your output is to learn a specific skill. Let's say that you know how to turn a bunch of wood into a table by investing your time and skills. While it might seem like a silly and obvious example, the reality is that this example is no different from someone who is making millions of dollars. In fact, the person making the chairs might actually end up making millions of dollars by allocating his resources more effectively. Instead of building the chairs himself, he hires people and provides them with the tools to build the chairs, while finding a supplier that offers him wood at a competitive price. There are skills that can immediately increase your output, such as plumbing. On the other hand, there are skills that might not immediately result in an output, but will help you to allocate your resources more effectively, such as managing your time better, learning how to hire and manage people. These skills can help you to go from being a designer to start a designing company where you will have a team of designers working for you. Public speaking can help you raise funds for your venture. Leadership skills can help you to attract talented people to your team. And accounting skills will help you to manage your money more effectively. Knowledge is important, but if you don't use the information frequently, you are likely to forget it, just like everything you have forgot that you have learned back in school. However, if it's a skill that you practice often, it stays with you, continuously maximizing your productivity. That is why rich people focus on building skills. Number 4, capital allocation. Let's say you want to build a cool tree house in your backyard. You can allocate your capital by using your money to buy wood, nails, paint, and other materials that you need. You can spend a lot of time figuring out how to build it effectively. And if you become really good at it so that your neighbor would want a similar cool tree house, he might be willing to pay you to teach him to build it faster instead of spending countless hours trying to figure out himself. That becomes your output. To increase your output even further, you can build a cool tree house and sell it to him. If the entire town wants the same cool tree house, you can maximize your output because there is now more demand for it. Now, do that on a massive scale, like in a country with 320 million people, you will earn a couple of billions of dollars. Congratulations, you are now a billionaire. When you start looking at money from that perspective, suddenly your whole perspective of money changes. Suddenly, it makes sense why Elon Musk is worth $200 billion while your uncle who is complaining that his boss is not paying him enough is poor. Number 5. Rich people get richer because they don't consume as much as they produce. How much do you think Elon Musk spends per month? $1 million? Maybe $10 million? Perhaps $20 million? He definitely spends a lot of money. The fact that he flies private all the time already means that he spends tens of thousands of dollars per flight. But that's still a tiny fraction of what he produces. When I hear people say that if I had as much money as Bill Gates or Elon Musk, they would buy this or that, that is the difference. Rich people don't just produce in order to consume. They produce much more than they consume. And they keep producing even if they don't end up consuming that. There's so many people who passed away leaving behind dozens of billions of dollars. Of course, there are different types of rich people, like the ones who inherited their money, so they consume significantly more than they produce. That is why 70% of families lose their fortune by the second generation and 90% by the third generation. But I'm talking about self-made people, not necessarily billionaires, but people who have made at least a few $1,000,000. Instead of buying an expensive car or luxury items, they chose to invest their money in businesses and assets that keep generating income, that keep producing something. So they continue to produce wealth through their investments, which allow them to accumulate even more wealth and making them richer and richer. And that takes us to the next point. Don't be motivated by money. The problem is that most poor people are motivated by money. And there is nothing wrong with that because it's difficult to be motivated by anything else when you can't put food on the table. However, if you operate solely from that perspective, you will increase your output only to meet your consumption needs and not beyond. If you want to get richer, you should be motivated to keep producing even if you don't want to consume more. Not being motivated by money doesn't mean that you should not be making money. You should be making money because your output is measured in money. But the goal should not be to make more money just for the sake of consumption. You don't want to make more money to buy another Ferrari or eat 6 times instead of 3, but rather be able to produce more. And as long as rich people have that perspective and the poor people have the perspective to produce just in order to consume, the gap between the rich and the poor will continue getting wider, especially when we have this thing called debt. The rich use debt to increase their output. For example, if they have a business that makes $1 million a year, for example, they can borrow $200,000 and make $2 million instead. On the other hand, the poor person will borrow $50,000 to buy a nicer car, and now they have to work more, aka to produce more, because now they're consuming more than they are producing. Number 7. Embrace capitalism. Capitalism is not perfect and has many flaws, but it's the system that we have. The means of production in capitalism are land, labor, and capital. Whoever controls the capital controls the system, which is why it's called capitalism and not landism or laborism. The entire system is designed around the idea to make the best use of the capital. For most of human history, even if you had all the gold in the world, there wasn't much you could do with that capital. You could build an army and invade a neighboring country and exploit their resources, but it was a risky bet that few dared to attempt, such as the kings. However, today we have built an entire economy around the idea that as long as you have capital, it can be effectively used in the economy to generate production. This is why we have the stock market, the bond market, the real estate market. The purpose of the stock market is to connect those who need capital with those who have the capital. We have even created companies like the Vanguard S&P 500 index fund that invest in the safest companies in the market, generating a decent return. That's why learning how to invest, especially in the stock market, is one of the best ways to maximize your output. There is literally not a single millionaire or a billionaire probably in the entire world who doesn't actively invest his money. If you want to learn more about the stock market, check out the links to the videos that explain how the stock market works and how to start investing. You will find them somewhere below. That's it for today. Thanks guys for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one.